Hi, my name is Martin Perhiniak. Welcome back to the digital art series here on PSD Tuts Plus. In this episode, I'm going to talk about custom brushes and special features in the brush panel. First of all, I would like to show you how I usually use the brush tip shape option panel, which you can find here on the control bar. So here with this little arrow, you can choose the stroke thumbnail option, which will not only show you the brush tip shape, but it will show you a preview of the stroke. And you can always make this panel bigger or smaller, but I tend to use two columns like this to be able to see more than just in one column. If you want to see the same brushes that I can see here, if you use CS5, then you will be able to see the same brushes. If you click on the same arrow and you choose Reset Brushes, and then you choose OK, then you should see exactly the same brushes what I can see here. It's good to know that by clicking on that arrow, here you can find brush sets that you can choose. And you can also save your brushes by clicking on Save Brushes option, and then you will have your own set. But first of all, I would like to show you, by using the brush options, there are so many options available that we can apply to our brushes. I just would like to show you one example. This is the brush tip shape. You can see it on my screen. It's like a grass. And if I choose a color, let me just choose with the keyboard shortcut, Command, Alt and Control together, and then click and select a color, like this one. And then I start drawing. You will see that I can start drawing grass, but my background color should be also a dark green color. So I switch to that color by pressing X on the keyboard. Again, I pick a color, and now I will pick a darker green. Now if I start drawing, you can see that I'm building up grass detail here on the canvas, and really easily, just simply drawing over and over again, and the grass details will build up. So you can see by using these brushes, the default brushes in Photoshop, you can achieve really nice effects, and this is just one example of many. But to be able to do something like this on your own, you need to learn how to work with the brush panel, because most of the options applied to this brush is also here in the brush panel. So for example, scattering makes it possible to have a random placement whenever I draw. So instead of drawing in a line, Photoshop will scatter these grass particles on my canvas. But to learn these options, I will first show you a similar example, but we are going to create our own brush tip shape as well. So let me just create a new document. I go to File, New, and I usually create a 200 by 200 pixel size document. You don't need bigger than that most of the times. This is enough. I switch back to the default colors by pressing D on the keyboard. And then I use my brush, and I also go back and select a normal brush like this one. I make my brush smaller, Control Alt and click, or right click on the PC and make my brush smaller, something like that. And I put a small dot at the bottom there, and I'm going to put another dot here on the top. I would like to save this as a brush preset, so I select everything, Command A to select all, or go to Select menu and choose Select All. Then go to Edit and choose Define Brush Preset. So that will save this as a brush preset, and I'm going to call this Stripe. And I save it. I'm going to create another brush as well. So this is a brush tip shape. You will see how we are going to use it. Now I delete it. So I get rid of this first by filling it with white. It's also a useful keyboard shortcut to know. To fill with the background color, it's Command Backspace. To fill with the foreground color, it's Alt Backspace. Alt Backspace and Command or Control on PC Backspace is to fill quickly with your foreground and background colors. So I filled it back with white, the canvas, and I again switch back to a normal brush. So let me just select a normal brush like this one. And I would like to create another brush tip shape, but now I'm going to use, instead of using my brush, I'm going to use the polygon tool. So I select the polygon tool from the vector drawing tools, and for the additional options I set the size for 5, and here on this arrow I choose star, indent sides by 90%. So sides set to 5, actually it can be set to 4, and the star option is turned on and the indent size by 90%. Now if I click and drag, I can draw a star shape like this, and I can use always space while keeping down the mouse to draw, to move it around. So let me just zoom a bit closer. So when I click and start drawing, if I want to move it around, I can always hold down space, and when I let go space I can continue drawing. So that's what I'm doing now, and I set the star's size to something like this. Then I make a duplicate of this layer, right click, duplicate layer, and then I use Command T, which is the free transform tool, to rotate this around, and then I press enter. Then I use again the free transform tool, Command T or Control T on PC, and I make this inner side a bit smaller, something like this. So this is the star that I would like to use, and whenever I zoom in and I zoom out, it's good to know the keyboard shortcuts. Command 1 is to see the actual pixel size, Command 0 is to fit to screen. So now I select again the whole canvas and I go to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and I call this star, and then I press enter. Now I can close this document and go back to my other document. I just fill it in with white again, just to clear the whole canvas. And from my brushes, the brush tip shapes, I will see at the bottom the 2 last brushes are the ones that I just created. First I would like to show you the star brush, so I just select that one, and as you can see I can already draw with this brush, but it's not the way that I would like to use it. So I just go back a couple of steps, and instead of using it like this, I'm going to set it up properly here in the brush panel. First of all, I would like to go to the brush tip shape options, and here I can show you that something that we used in the previous episode as well. I can make it or change the density of the brush by changing the spacing. Now that's a really interesting option, but in this case I would like to leave it somewhere around 50%. Then I go to the shape dynamics and I turn it on. Now here in the shape dynamics, first of all, if I set back everything to defaults, I can do that by moving all these jitter options to the left. So first of all, what I can do is to set the size control to pen pressure. Now if I start drawing, the more I press down, the harder I press my pen on the tablet, the larger the size will get. So that's already a useful option, but I would like to use a size jitter as well, so I increase the size jitter to 100%. Jitter is like randomizing the size. So now if I draw, you will see that there is a random option on the size of the brush. Even though I have a pen pressure set to control, it still randomizes the size, okay? And I would like to also randomize the angle. That's really important with this brush. So now if I start drawing, you can see even the angle is randomized. This brush can already be used for barbed wire, for example, but I would like to use it for another thing, so I'm going to also change settings here in the scattering. So I go to scattering and I start to increase the scatter option, and you can see that on the preview, the more I increase it, the further away the stars will get from each other. So I would like to do something like this, okay? And you can choose both axes or just use one axis. So you can always change this option here, and you can also increase the count number, which will again make it more dense. So now I make my brush smaller and I start drawing, and you can see we have a very interesting effect with this star brush. Okay, but I would like to also affect the opacity of these little star shapes. So I go to the transfer options and I choose pen pressure for the opacity and also increase opacity jitter. Now if I start drawing, you see we will affect not only the size but also the opacity. So that's a great option here. And we can also set up color dynamics. So if I choose color dynamics, here instead of choosing foreground, background jitter only, which is just randomizing the foreground and background colors, you can also play with the hue, saturation and brightness jitters. First of all, I just change my colors, my foreground color to red and my background color to blue, just to have two different colors. And if I start drawing, now you can see Photoshop will randomize the colors, these two colors, but because we have a hue jitter, it also uses different colors than red and blue. Now I remove the hue jitter, you can see it's only the mix of these two colors, so red and blue. If I add hue jitter to it, it will be a very random color. And you can also use saturation and brightness jitter. This is a brush that we are going to use in an episode, in a following episode. I just would like to show you a quick example. In Bridge, if I select an image and I press space, you can see a full screen preview, but then if you click on the image, it will zoom closer to it. So you can see the same tool used here in this image to add these little star shapes, and it adds a special effect on the image. So this brush can be easily used on photos to create photo art like this one. And the way we created this scatter brush, I usually call these scatter brushes, so the way we created this can be applied to any brush tip shape. So you first create a brush tip shape, you save it as a brush preset, and then you start applying options to it from the brush panel. But remember, it's good to save that brush with these settings. And usually what I do is I go to the brush options here, the brush presets, and I create a new preset for this. So I click on that and I call it star brush. So it will include the colors as well that I prefer to use with this brush. It will include the brush tip shape that we created and also all the options from the brush panel. So that's the best way to save a preset for yourself. After you created a brush tip shape and you selected colors and you selected the brush options, then that's the best way to save it as a preset. So all these options together. And then I click on OK. So now I have a star brush, and I just show you I have a soft brush setup, and as you can see it automatically changed the color. I can now draw with the soft brush, but if I switch back here on the presets to star brush, I will automatically switch back to the previous brush. You can also import brushes. If you download brushes from the internet, you can always go to the brush tip options, and here you can say load brushes, and then just select the file that you downloaded, and then you will have new brushes in Photoshop. Or if you created your own brushes, remember to save those brushes to capture the brush tip shapes. And if you have too many brushes, then I recommend to go to Preset Manager, because here in the Preset Manager, you can always delete the brushes that you don't need. So for example, if I don't need these brushes, I just select them, shift click to select more than one at the same time, and then click on delete, and then it will be removed. It won't be deleted from the computer, but it will be removed from your brushes or brush tip shapes. Now there is also another interesting thing before I create my second custom brush. The other interesting thing is in CS5 a new feature called the bristle brushes. Now these brushes have different icon, so wherever you see the brush tip shapes, for the bristle brushes you see actually brushes, and I just show you one. I select one. And the advantage of the bristle brushes is that if you use a tablet which can also understand not only the pressure but also the angle of your brushes, then you will be able to move the brush around and see how your pen is on the tablet. So you can see that I'm moving my pen and it follows the angle of my pen. So if I start drawing, I can change the angle of the brush while I'm drawing, just like with a real brush. Again, this is only available if you have a tablet like the Intuos. So it won't work with a Bamboo, it will work with an Intuos properly. On a Bamboo you can still use this brush, but it won't be able to follow the angle changes. And these brushes can be used to simulate traditional media brushes. And of course, if you don't want to see this preview, you can make it smaller or completely get rid of it by clicking on that X. I'm going to leave it there just to make sure you see what I'm doing with my pen. But now I would like to delete these and would like to create my second custom brush. So I go to my brush tip shapes and I select this one, which we saved. If you remember these two dots. And the reason why I saved this is because I would like to set up another brush, another very useful brush, just as an example of the endless possibilities with brushes in Photoshop. So I have these two little points on this brush. I'm going to make it a bit smaller, and I go to the brush panel, and I would like to first of all go to brush tip shape and set the brush tip shape to 1% to make it very smooth. So now I can draw and it's really nice and smooth. And actually that's all what I wanted to set up for this brush, and I just want to make it smaller, something like this. And now I save it as a preset. So I go to the presets and I click on new, and I call this stripe brush, like that. Now if I start drawing, I can draw something like this, and then I switch to another brush. I call it line drawing. It's just a simple 3-point size brush, and I would like to draw the edges of this stripe. It's good to know that if you want to draw a straight line, just hold down Shift on the keyboard, and with that you can hold completely straight lines like these. Okay, so I hold down Shift and I draw a line there, and then I draw another line somewhere here. That will be the other end, and I also draw a line here and another line there. Yeah, so something like this. Maybe I draw this again. I'm not happy with this one. And like that. Okay, that's fine. Now I'm going to use the selection tool and select this part. I don't need this part, and I zoom also a bit closer. Then I press Command Backspace to fill that part with white. Maybe this little part here I just zoom closer and I erase it with the eraser tool. I also do the same thing here. So I'm using the eraser tool and getting rid of this part. Also that one there. And let me see it here as well. So I want to have a realistic stripe like this one. Now this is great, but to finish this I'm going to show you another useful technique. So I'm going to use my magic wand tool, and I click here in the middle. I shift click on that part and I shift click on that part to select them all. And then I'm going to create a new layer by clicking on new layer option. And then I go to the masks panel, and to turn this selection into a mask, you just need to click on this icon here on the top, which will create a mask from your selection. And I have an empty layer with a mask. So if I select the layer and not the mask, so this is when I have the mask selected, this is when I have the layer selected. So I keep that selected, and I'm going to select a color for this stripe. I would like to use something like this, and I press Alt Backspace, and I already filled in the stripe with that color. Maybe I would like to use a bit brighter color. Yes, something like that. Okay, excellent. So we have that color on a separate layer, and because we use the mask, it will only appear inside the stripe. Now I create another layer on top of this, and I'm going to start drawing on that layer with a normal brush. So let me just select a soft edge brush actually. I created a soft edge brush preset, and I set the brush first of all to white. Make my brush even bigger, and I set the opacity to 10%. I'm using all the keyboard shortcuts that we already discussed, and I'm going to draw on this layer with white. But the problem is that even though you can't see it, I'm not only drawing over the stripe, but I also draw in the background. Okay, so that's not really a good way to do this. So I just show it with black. With black you can see what happens. So if I draw with black, it will appear also in the background and also on the stripe. But I only want to keep this on the stripe. So to do that, I'm going to create a clipping mask between this layer and the layer below it by alt-clicking between the two layers. And then if I alt-click, I will only draw over the stripe. So it will keep this layer on the top only visible inside the other layer. If you are not familiar with masking, using layer masks and clipping masks, please go to the basic series here on PSD Touch Plus, because there I thoroughly explain all these options that I'm using here. This series is a bit more advanced, so we are using all those skills and techniques that we've learned in the basic series, and here we concentrate on the things that you need to know to create art in Photoshop. So now that I've set up the layers, I can start using them properly. So I just delete these details and I set my brush to white, and I'm start drawing over this part here first. Then I start drawing over again, and I'm making my brush smaller, and I add less and less white, and I'm building up the opacity by using 10%. Now there is another way to do a similar effect like this, but by setting the opacity to 100%, turning the opacity dynamic on, and set the flow to 1%. I used Shift 001 to set it quickly to 1%, the flow. And now if I start drawing just carefully and building up the effect, I can get to the same effect easily. So let me show it again. I draw over it carefully, and then here I'm holding it down and drawing it more firmly. I switch to black now, and I do the same thing here, carefully, and then more stronger, and do the same thing maybe here, where I want to have darker details, and maybe there as well, and here. So you can see we have a really nice effect on this ribbon now, and if I want to, I can always decrease the opacity of this layer, which I use to tone the layer, if I want to have less contrast, or just simply reduce the intensity of these tones, the brighter and darker tones. But you can see if I turn this off and turn it on, the highlights and the shadows are the most essential things to make something look three-dimensional. And remember, all we started with is a brush tip shape, a very simple brush tip shape, which you can use to create ribbons like this one, or stripes. So let me just switch back to that one again. So the stripe brush, and just to show you another one, I create a new layer and I drew another one here. Okay, so remember, this option is really useful, and it's just up to your creativity that how you use this brush. That's all for this episode. In the next one, I'm going to talk about composition. So we will learn a bit of theory, and we will also learn some really cool stuff here in Photoshop. So make sure that you join me next time as well. So see you soon, and thanks for your attention.